It was a sunny morning when I set off on my walk along the trail. The sound of the nearby river was soothing, and I could feel the small rocks beneath my shoes as I walked. The path was familiar to me, nestled between the river and a seldom used road. There were a few spots where you could cross the river and reach the road. I was out with a few colleagues from work, happy to get away from the office for a while. But as we walked, I found myself lagging behind, mesmerized by the peacefulness of the place. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I noticed something unusual. A truck parked right next to the path. A man was leaning against it, scanning the area before his gaze fixed on me. He greeted me with a friendly smile and asked how my day was going, curious about who I was with. His eyes kept darting around, which made me feel uneasy. He pointed out that he couldn't see anyone else nearby, making me feel all the more isolated. His words lingered in my mind, filling me with a sense of coldness and loneliness. He went on to mention a local hiking group and said he wanted to give me a business card from his truck. He asked if I could help him search for it. I was frightened and politely refused. My heart was racing when, just then, I heard the sound of my friend's dog's collar jingling. I felt a surge of relief as the dog came bounding up the trail, wagging its tail. I quickly called out, "Looks like my friends are coming, goodbye," and turned to hurry away, feeling much safer with the dog by my side. As I looked back, I couldn't help but wonder what the man's intentions were. Was he just trying to be playful, or did he not realize how unsettling his words were? Either way, it was a reminder to stay cautious and aware, even in places that seem peaceful and safe. When I met up with my friends again, I told them what had happened. They seemed just as shaken as I was. We decided to cut our walk short and head back to our cars. It was the most frightening experience I'd ever had while hiking. It was a moonless night, and I was walking down a tight trail surrounded by towering rocky cliffs. The air was still, not a single breeze to stir the leaves or branches. The quiet was so thick it felt alive, wrapping me in its cold grasp. Suddenly, a terrifying sound shattered the stillness. It was a cry, muffled but filled with urgency, like someone calling for help at the top of their lungs. Mixed with it was the sharp, high-pitched wail of an infant, raw and unsettling. My heart began to race as the eerie cry echoed off the rock faces around me. Then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps. They were so close, too close for comfort. A chill ran down my spine, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. A deep sense of warning stirred within me. I froze, holding my breath. I knew this place like the back of my hand, but this was something unfamiliar and terrifying. Summoning all the courage I had, I inched closer to where the sound was coming from. But the closer I got, the more my instincts screamed at me to turn back. Out of nowhere, the cry grew louder, more frantic. A shiver ran through me, and I could feel the fear creeping in. Without thinking, I spun around and ran toward my car, parked not far off. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled with my keys, finally managing to unlock the door and slip inside. I let out a breath of relief and started the car, quickly driving away, leaving the unsettling sounds behind me. Once I got home, I couldn't shake the strange experience. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to search for "Cry for Help Scream at Night" online. The results revealed that it was the mating call of a red fox, and the mating season for red foxes had recently begun in Montana. The realization hit me hard. All those terrifying noises and the footsteps, it had all been part of nature at work. It was just a big misunderstanding. But that night, that walk, would stay with me forever. It was a haunting reminder of how the unknown can be the scariest thing of all. And even though I now understood what caused those sounds, the memory of that eerie night still sends a shiver down my spine. My friends and I loved taking late-night walks around our small town. We were so familiar with the paths that we could navigate them without thinking. Most nights, we'd head to a scenic viewpoint to relax, sometimes sharing a cigarette beneath the starry sky. On nights when the moon shone brightly, we could walk the trails without needing flashlights. One night, 5 of us set off on a moonlit adventure. We came to a flat, wooded area of the trail that stretched for about a quarter of a mile. It was here that one of my friends had to use his phone light for a while. As the beam cut through the darkness, I noticed several pairs of glowing eyes staring back at us from about 20 feet away, just out of the light's reach. I pointed them out, and a wave of fear hit us all. We quickly turned on our flashlights, and when we did, we saw ourselves surrounded by the eerie shine of eyes in the dark. There were likely a dozen pairs, all silently watching us. One of my friends, trying to act brave, picked up a stick and made loud noises. Whatever creatures those eyes belonged to, they scattered into the darkness without a sound. But we knew we weren't alone. We each grabbed bigger sticks and kept our flashlights scanning the area as we walked, constantly looking around. They were probably coyotes, behaving as they often do, but the image of those eyes glowing in the dark would stay with me forever. As we neared the end of the trail, the rush of adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. Marshall Wilderness was a vast and untamed area that seemed endless. The day was long and exhausting, with my boots crunching on the trail and birds singing in the distance. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I decided to set up camp. I found a small clearing between tall pine trees, pitched my tent, and prepared a simple meal over a tiny campfire, the aroma of food blending with the fresh scent of the forest. After taking some melatonin and a vitamin, I crawled into my sleeping bag, ready for a peaceful night's rest. In the middle of the night, I was stirred by sounds outside my tent, leaves rustling, twigs snapping, and a low growl that echoed in the stillness. But I was too exhausted to investigate, assuming it was just the usual night noises of the wilderness. When morning arrived, soft sunlight filtered through the tent fabric. I stretched, feeling the stiffness from sleeping on the hard ground. That's when I noticed them, large, round indentations in the dirt, circling my tent about 5 meters away. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what they were: bear tracks. The rest of the day, I stayed on high alert. Every rustling leaf and every snapping twig made my heart race. As night fell, I made sure to hang my food high up in a tree, far from any curious bears. I hardly slept, every noise in the silent wilderness seeming amplified. The next morning, I packed up my camp and headed out. Back when I was in university, A few years ago, my family and I decided to take a hike to Fish Lake in Glacier National Park. We woke up as early as we could with a teenager and a young child in tow. The hike was challenging, especially for our youngest, as it was an uphill trek, gaining over 1,300 feet in elevation and stretching about 6 miles. The trail was peaceful, with only a few hikers passing by in the opposite direction. We were glad to have the trail mostly to ourselves, but everything shifted when we entered a dense, shadowy forest. A strange sensation crept over us, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We started glancing behind us and soon found ourselves walking faster. What had started as a quiet hike quickly became a noisy scramble as we talked and yelled, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. We had hoped Fish Lake would be a nice spot to rest and have a picnic, just like we did the day before at another lake. However, when we reached Fish Lake, it wasn't what we expected. The grass and shrubs were taller than my husband, blocking the view of the lake. There was no place to sit, and we felt uncomfortable. The strange sensation from the forest didn't fade. it intensified. We hurriedly ate our sandwiches, the quickest meal I can remember. As the discomfort became too much to ignore, we decided it was best to leave and head back to the part of the trail we knew well. We nearly ran, eager to get past the bridge that marked the edge of the dark forest. Once we crossed the bridge, the uneasy feeling lifted. We were back on familiar ground, and the rest of the walk was calm. Looking back, my husband and I are certain that something was watching us. Perhaps a mountain lion or a bear, but it felt like we were being followed. With our young child with us, we were so relieved to make it out of there. My friend and I were excited to camp and hunt turkeys in the Pine Ridge Forest near the Appalachian Mountains. We were familiar with the area from our past winter trips. We chose a flat spot for our tent, avoiding rocks, and set up near a shelter. Both of us were looking forward to the turkey hunt. My friend was organizing his gear in the tent, while I wandered over to the edge of the clearing. That's when I noticed something, a quick shadow darting through the thick underbrush. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another hiker searching for a spot to camp. As the evening rolled in, we walked around the woods, hoping to find turkeys. By the time we returned to our campsite, it was getting dark, but not dark enough to need a headlamp. We decided to build a small fire to relax and have a meal. While I was gathering wood, I saw movement again. I shouted, "Hey!" to let whoever was there know we were around, and heard footsteps running off. It was a little unsettling, but we brushed it off. A deer could have easily caused the noise, though I could have sworn I saw someone wearing a red t-shirt. We spent another night at camp, and nothing unusual happened. The next day, I never quite figured out who or what I had seen that first evening. It remained a mystery during my backpacking trip in the Lost Ridge Wilderness. As the weather grew colder and the leaves turned, I decided to take one last solo camping trip before the first snow of winter would make my gear impractical. I selected a secluded valley nestled between towering mountains and dense forests. It was late in the season, so I didn't expect to encounter other campers. My plan was to set up camp and then venture off the main trail, making my way to a pair of lakes on my map, roughly 3 kilometers from my site. However, I lost track of time and ended up straying further than expected. By the time I arrived at the campsite, the sun was beginning to set. The valley was known to have grizzly bears, so I hurriedly pitched my tent and headed into the woods. There was a trail for a while, but soon I found myself cutting through thick brush with no clear path. To alert any bears nearby, I kept calling out, "Hey ho!" as I walked. After covering about a kilometer, I heard a response. "Hey ho!" a woman's voice called back. It was so clear and loud, I thought someone had appeared right behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone emerge from the bushes, but no one was there. I waited, heart racing, but still no one appeared. A little unnerved, I pressed on and finally reached the lakes. I gazed down at the forest below, but saw no signs of anyone. The feeling of being watched lingered, and with the growing darkness, I decided it was time to leave. I hurried back to my campsite, arriving just as night fully fell. Fortunately, a few other campers had arrived. They told me they hadn't seen anyone on their way in, and given the route, they would have if there had been someone else. The night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the thought of that mysterious voice in the woods. Whoever it was, if they had left that evening, they did so in complete darkness, which was unsettling. There were only 2 ways into that part of the valley, through the campsite or over some challenging mountain passes. To this day, I have no idea who that person could have been. In the dense forests of West Virginia, it was our first time venturing alone into such an isolated area. The trail wasn't frequently traveled, with wild plants and fallen leaves overtaking it. As we ascended, we noticed fresh blood on the stones lining the path. A cold chill ran down our spines. We paused, staring at the blood, the silence of the woods amplifying our unease. Nearby, we found some fur, which gave us a bit of comfort, thinking it might have been from an injured animal. Taking a deep breath, we decided to press on, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping in. Just as we began to move again, a young man, about 19 or 20, appeared out of nowhere. He was sprinting up the hill at a fast pace, his face blank, not sparing us a glance as he sped past. We were left feeling confused and uneasy. The rest of our walk was unnervingly quiet, and we didn't encounter anyone else. Upon reaching the summit, we were greeted with a hidden view of a tall waterfall, but what really caught our attention was a new hat resting on a rock beside the waterfall. It was the first sign of human presence we'd noticed since the young man. Not far from it, a clean, dry sleeping bag hung from a tree branch. The scene felt off and the eerie vibe grew stronger. The waterfall, though beautiful, was overshadowed by the strange situation we found ourselves in. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, we decided it was time to leave. Our hearts raced as we hurried down the other side of the path, the sound of our rapid footsteps echoing through the quiet woods. When we finally saw our car, relief washed over us. We quickly climbed in, and the engine's hum broke the silence as we drove away. But we couldn't shake the urge to glance back at the path, disappearing into the forest. Even now, I can't help but wonder what was truly happening in those woods and what the young man was running from. Not long ago, my girlfriend and I went hiking in a local nature reserve. It was a perfect day. The air smelled fresh, like wood and earth. We enjoy hiking and are familiar with the trails, but we always stay alert because anything can happen in the wild. We chose a trail near the edge of the park for convenience. As we walked, the sound of cars faded, and soon all we could hear were the rustling leaves and birds singing. That's when I spotted something odd. A pair of sunglasses just lying on the ground. Seemed strange, but we didn't think much of it and kept going. The trail led us deeper into the woods, and the trees grew denser, casting interesting patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Suddenly, I noticed two men, likely in their 30s, tall and in good shape, rounding a bend. A cold feeling swept over me, like some kind of warning. They approached us, grinning, and one of them was holding the sunglasses I had seen earlier. He asked if they were ours. I replied quickly, no, and they didn't move, standing way too close for comfort. It felt like when someone sits next to you in an empty theater, it was unsettling. I had a strong sense of unease in my stomach, and without saying another word, I told my girlfriend we should leave. We turned around and started walking briskly, not daring to look back, but then we heard footsteps behind us. They were following us. My heart started pounding, and the fear grew with every step they took. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they passed us by and continued down the path as if nothing was wrong. I felt a wave of relief, but I was still uneasy, unsure of what just happened. We made it to our car, and I drove away as fast as I could. The park didn't feel like a safe, peaceful place anymore after that. A while later, I heard about a violent incident that occurred in the same park. I'm not sure if those were the same men, but I'll never forget the gut feeling I had when they approached. In the end, my girlfriend and I were fine, and that's all that matters. We still hike, but now we're extra cautious, always trusting our instincts. Sometimes the scariest threats are the ones you can't see. Last year, I decided to go on a hike not far from where I live. The trail was known for its incredible views, and it was often crowded with people. However, I arrived late that evening, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows on the trees. I thought I had enough time for a quick stroll before it got dark. The path was unusually empty, which struck me as odd for such a popular spot. It was getting late, so maybe that was why everyone had left. Being by myself out there felt strange, but in a good way. I could hear birds singing off in the distance, their songs echoing through the trees. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. But as I walked, the bird sounds began to fade, and soon, everything fell silent. It was so still that it felt almost heavy, but I tried to reassure myself it was just the quiet of the woods at dusk. Then, I heard something rustling in the bushes on my right. I froze, my heart pounding. All the scary stories about the woods I had heard over the years suddenly came rushing to my mind. I stood there motionless, but nothing came out of the bushes, and the noise stopped just as suddenly as it had begun. Just a rabbit? I whispered to myself, trying to calm down, and continued walking. I hadn't gone far when the quiet was broken again, this time by a noise on my left. It was closer this time, and it felt almost like it was done on purpose. I didn't stick around to figure it out. My body surged with energy, and I turned around, walking briskly without actually running. I didn't want to panic or end up being followed. I kept moving quickly towards my car, the woods now eerily silent. There were no birds or small animals rustling about, just the sound of my footsteps and my heart pounding in my chest. I reached my car just as it was getting truly dark. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off about that place. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that there had to be a simple explanation for the quiet and the strange sounds, but honestly, I felt so much relief once I was out of there. To this day, I don't know what caused those noises in the bushes, and in some ways, I'm okay with that.